So will Vladimir Putin face justice for leading the onslaught, and could further war crimes be prevented? With us now is an expert on atrocity prevention, Rebecca Hamilton, who is a New Zealander working as an Associate Professor of Law at American University in Washington, D.C. Kia ora, Rebecca, thank you for your time. So Vladimir Putin has been labelled a war criminal by Boris Johnson, Joe Biden and other world leaders. Is that justified?
Look, we had a chat about this, Simon. I think I'm much less concerned with what various politicians say about Vladimir Putin. I'm much more concerned with what they're doing to stop him. But certainly I understand that the images that we're all seeing are so horrific that people feel motivated to bring out this label of war criminal. The lawyer in me has to say we like to see the criminal process proceed. But I do think there's some degree to which these characterizations can help build the political will that is needed to ensure that prosecutions do go forward.
OK, so someone like our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has not gone as far to label Putin a war criminal. I mean, if she did, does that help with what you're talking about how to try and build the case, build the momentum?
No, I don't think it moves the needle significantly. And I think that Jacinda Ardern and other politicians, she's not alone in this, that have been more measured in their remarks are probably just listening better to their legal advisors. Certainly as a lawyer, I would say we need to have the evidence to not only see that these atrocities are happening, that's straightforward. Every one of us is watching that in real time. But for a prosecutor, you've actually got to link that to an individual perpetrator and then up the chain of command. And that takes all sorts of evidence, of interviews, of intelligence intercepts, various things that we don't have at this fairly early stage of the conflict. And so the more measured characterizations that you are seeing from Jacinda Ardern and others, I think just reflect that legal reality.
I think you've worked up a case, sort of a theoretical case against Putin for the crime of aggression. So what does that mean? What is the crime of aggression?
So this is a really important concept to get one's head around, which is that the crime of aggression is the initial decision to go to war by Putin. And this is one thing, unlike the war crimes where we have to look up the chain of command and connect the atrocities that Russian soldiers are committing up to Putin. The crime of aggression is a leadership crime. And I am confident, based on the model criminal indictment that I have written with a colleague over here, that we have enough evidence already to go ahead with a prosecution of Putin for the crime of aggression, for the decision to wage war in the first place, to invade another sovereign nation. And that is really the original crime from which all of the other atrocities that we are now seeing flows from. So it's going to be very important to ensure that he is prosecuted for that, in addition to whatever else he might be responsible for.
But how will Putin ever be prosecuted? How can the world hold Putin to account if, I mean, they're not a signatory to the International Criminal Court? He's not going to voluntarily, give himself up. How's it going to happen?
So on this, it's important to manage expectations because justice does take time. However, what the history shows is that we get there in the long run. So it's important to be gathering the evidence and building these cases today. I expect to see that arrest warrants will come out. But you're right, the International Criminal Court, for example, doesn't have its own police force. It can't go in there and arrest Putin directly. While he's sitting comfortably in the Kremlin, it's hard to see how that enforcement happens. He would have to travel to another country that would arrest him, or there would need to be a change within Russian domestic politics. All of those I fully appreciate seem inconceivable in this moment. But back to the historical point, I was at the International Criminal Court when we issued an arrest warrant for the then Sudanese president, Omar al-Bashir, and it seemed impossible at that moment that he would ever be brought to justice. He is now sitting in a Sudanese jail cell. Similarly, when we had the atrocities in the former Yugoslavia, an arrest warrant was issued for Slobodan Milosevic. He seemed impervious to accountability at that time, but circumstances changed inside Serbia and new authorities handed him over to The Hague. So I think we have to retain some hope that in time justice will happen.
I just want to talk on the other side of what we're seeing. There are some sort of social media evidence of Ukrainian soldiers perhaps executing, humiliating or kneecapping Russian soldiers. Is it likely that both sides have committed war crimes and could be sort of, susceptible to charges?
Yeah, so the International Criminal Court that has jurisdiction over war crimes in this situation always will look at atrocities committed by any party to a conflict. So their jurisdiction is based on whatever happens on the territory of Ukraine. It's not based on are these atrocities committed by Russians or by Ukrainians. So I think it's important for the Ukrainian military and all of their volunteers to also be aware that they could be subject to prosecution if they do violate the laws of war.
And does that go up the chain to the President, Zelensky?
Potentially it could, but I think, you're seeing the same evidence that I'm seeing at the moment, that there's such a huge disparity between Russian violations and Ukrainian violations, that certainly most of the focus is going to be on the Russian violations because they are the most representative of the overall criminality that we're seeing in the situation.
What do you make of sort of a possible double standard in the West where there's a lot of concern about potential war crimes in Ukraine, but we haven't seen anything perhaps prosecuted for something like Syria?
Thanks for the question. I wouldn't even say a possible double standard. I would say an outright double standard. I think it's important to say, as I emphasise that, though, that the attention that Ukraine is getting is absolutely merited. This is what the world should do when people's lives and communities are being decimated. So the problem is not that Ukraine is getting too much attention, it's that we don't give the same level of attention to atrocities that are happening outside of Europe. And Syria is an excellent example. And I can point to plenty of others. So there's structural racism within the international system that is affecting this. And also, I think, a sort of parochial conception of what is in our national interests at any point, and thinking that if it doesn't touch inside our borders directly, then we don't need to focus on it. And over the long run, that doesn't actually work out.
OK. Rebecca Hamilton, Associate Professor of Law at American University, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.